Hello, everybody, and welcome to a very special episode, something new I'm calling Creative Corner. Today I'm joined by Jake Carlson, Nathan Snyder, Red Leader Antilles, Dr. Holocron, and Connor Nielsen. This was an idea put together by my good friend Jake here,
Okay,
and
I'm back.
he's going to kind of take the lead of this little experimental pilot. And Jake, take us away. This was your idea. Oh, uh-oh. Our little... Oh,
Jake?
yep, I guess we're...
Yes, sorry, I had to unmute my mic for a second. So, what I wanted to do with this podcast is basically just, I guess, vent out some of the ideas I had for writing a Flash continuity with you guys so I can bounce my ideas off some people. But before we got to that, I did want to sort of interview you guys sort of just on the fly about three things. And so those three things are individually for everybody. Sort of how you got into the Flash as the first thing, like what introduced you to the character, how did you get into reading the comics for him if you do it all,
Mic
and then the
working,
second,
or is it screwed up?
No, your mic working. I can hear you.
it's working, mate. And then the second thing is sort of your best thing, worst thing about Flash, what you like about the characters who have been the Flash in
My
their
mic's
universe, and then the last thing is what you would do given the Flash title without any, sort of constraints to previous continuity. How would you sort of write that world, and how would you sort of set it up?
Okay. I'll start us off with the interview part. Cause I probably have the quickest one, cause I'm kind of the newbie still. So in terms of me getting into the Flash, I bet like a lot of people, or at least from my generation at least, I got into him through the DC animated universe of the early 2000s. That would be Wally West, I believe that was, the Flash that was used in the Justice League cartoon.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. That's how I got into him. That's how I kind of know of his existence, and through other various DC cartoons of the time that he was introduced in. What I like about the character, I don't know. I just kind of like his. I know he kind of jokey one, at least from what I've seen. I'm sure that's very different from the comics. I know. I know. I'm not that well versed in the comic lore. I apologize. I mean, being able to go super fast. That's always a fun power too. It's the old joke. You want to see me go over there and back? Want to see me do it again? Uh, gotta love that.
Or Sonic with "Gotta Go Fast."
Oh yeah, that too. Gotta go fast. I can't think of any dislikes, but I don't know him enough to dislike just yet. And this is one thing I could do with the Flash universe. For me, I guess I know there's been three people who've been the Flash so far. I probably would make sure I had like a cohesive timeline of like this is this person's era and timeline, this is this person's era, and this is this person's era, and sort of like have a nice little passing of the torch for each one, so they all get their due, and they all kind of have a nice segue in. And that'd be my thing. Jake, you can pick who goes next if you want.
Awesome. I mean, anybody who has something to say can go next. It's up to you guys.
Red, Doc, sure.
I guess I'll go. So the way I was introduced to the Flash was actually through Wally West on Glenn Murakami's Teen Titans show. When Kid Flash was introduced there, that was my first exposure to the Flash, specifically to Wally West as a character. And personally, I've always preferred Wally West over Barry Allen. I just find him a lot more likable and interesting overall. Barry, while they've tried to do some stuff with him and like different things, I just never found him as compelling as Wally West character-wise. And that was only further cemented by the Justice League cartoons.
My mic's working.
Yeah, your mic's working, Nate.
So that's pretty
why
much
I
how I
can't
got
hear
introduced to the Flash. My worst thing, I guess my least favorite thing about the Flash is the fact that they keep trying to make Barry Allen more interesting by taking traits of Wally West and giving them to Barry Allen, which I'm just not a fan of, because like they're different characters entirely, and trying to make one the other is just weird. This is especially true for the Justice League movie, where they call him Barry Allen, but character-wise, he basically is Wally West, albeit a very poorly written Wally West, but still. So if I was going to write a new version of the Flash, I would not only do like the stuff where like he's faster than everyone, but I would also do stuff where he perceives the world faster than everyone, where like he can comprehend events and like periods of time faster than other people can. Like I would even go as far as to say like he goes through like the stages of grief faster than everyone, and he perceives like tragic events at a faster speed than everyone. So he isn't as affected in the same way by certain things as everyone else is. I would also make it like an aging thing where he's like almost like the clones in Star Wars. He kind of ages at double the speed that everyone else does. So there could be some interesting things with like how he interacts with his family and friends, knowing that he's not going to be around as long as they are. I guess I would do stuff like that.
Wait, so essentially your plan is a mix of impulse and, impulse.
I don't know what that is, so I guess.
He is, Barry's grandson, right?
Yep.
Yeah, and he ages super fast, and unlike the other Flashes, he can retain, like if he reads a book in like 5 seconds, the knowledge slips away for the other Flashes in about a minute, but Impulse can actually keep it.
Okay.
He's really cool.
So that's basically all I've got.
All right. Well, how about Connor? You go next if you have stuff to say.
Okay. So The Flash is a very interesting, and not particularly interesting story for me, because when it comes to The Flash, I think like most people, I was introduced through what little of the Justice League cartoon I saw when I was young, and I wasn't particularly interested in The Flash. I just knew he was a guy. And then when we got to me starting to read comics through the New 52, I just sort of picked up The Flash out of, like, I don't know, obligation, where it's like, well, I've always sort of wanted to know what this Flash guy is, because for as long as I can remember, super speed is the coolest power I could possibly think of. But of course, character who got me into super speed as the coolest superpower is Dash Parr from The Incredibles. So, but when it comes to the Flash, I've always liked his costume. It's very simple, it's very elegant, and he can run really fast. That's cool to me. But when it comes, I haven't watched the TV show. The Justice League movie is the worst comic book film ever made, so I won't even bother to talk about that sort of stuff. And when it comes to what I think of the character, and I've only read Barry Allen, so keep that in mind. I don't really know a lot of the Flash's convoluted history. I think the best single issue I've ever read of the Flash is actually an Impulse comic, and that's because it is Impulse number 1 million, because I have the 1 million omnibus, and so it's a nice little sliver of a glimpse into what the 90s DC universe looked like. So what the 90s Martian Manhunter series looked like, what Jerry Ordway's Shazam comic looked like, and Starman, etc. So I loved Impulse, and I didn't think I would, because just sort of flipping through the omnibus for the first time, I looked at that art and I was like, I don't think so. But then I read it, I'm like, this is delightful and wonderful and fun, and I like this character. And So when I started reading New 52 Flash, I was not really interested. I think Francis Manapul is maybe one of the best artists working today, maybe top 3, top 5, and I think his art is a huge reason why I kept reading that book. But there are 2 big issues I have with The Flash. The first being... Yeah?
No, he's trying his mic, sorry.
Okay. Well, so when it comes to The Flash, I have 2 big issues. The first is, I get that it's just a character quirk that, Barry's always...
working.
We can hear you, Nathan.
He can't
You are
hear
coming
us.
through.
He
Oh,
can't-
okay.
he can't-
Then maybe get new headphones. So, for a character quirk,
I don't hear
I get...
anything.
Nope.
Oh my god.
No,
So,
it's just a technical problem, sorry.
So, when it comes to, there are 2 big issues I have with the character. I feel like this is the 3rd time I've said this, but for his character quirk is that always late, and that's sort of like the irony of being the fastest man alive. As somebody who can speak for being perpetually late, I would never be late if I had a superpower that made me run as fast as light. So that's always been a bit of a frustrating thing in a story contrivance of, well, we need to have drama. Oh, what if he's late to stuff? Oh, he's the fastest man alive. That was kind of ironic. I feel like maybe that sort of thing is kind of played out and maybe get away from that if I were to write the Flash anyways. And also, I think that when it comes to Flash, oh boy, I'm trying to remember my second big issue with the Flash. Yeah. Maybe I'll remember it going on, but
You could just say the TV show.
I've never seen the TV show, so
You don't look
so I guess last things is if I've always wanted to like write the Flash because I've always thought that the superpower's cool and the costume's cool, but the characters never really particularly gravitated towards me because there's really not much to differentiate him between like Superman without the power. He's just kind of a wholesome, nice guy, and that's very except sometimes he's late. Oh, I remember what my other problem with the Flash is. I feel like we've kind of gone to this stage where it's like he can run as fast as light or speeds approaching light, and he's just super fast, and he's just so damn fast, people. But then, oh crap, we need to have like a story where he's fighting a bad guy, and the bad guy can get a couple hits in. He's not that fast right now. It's like, oh, give me a break. I don't.
Honestly, the way I think. Sorry, I don't mean to interrupt you.
Well, I'm almost finished. And so when it comes to like stuff like if I were writing the Flash, I would maybe break everyone's heart and maybe make him not as fast as light. Maybe make him 3 times faster than like Usain Bolt or something. Where it's like, I mean, maybe that is approaching light. I don't know.
Yeah.
But I would have it to be where it's believable that somebody with a freeze gun can perceive him coming at you and then have enough time to pull a trigger so that ice can hit the ground so then he can land on his butt. Like, that's what I'm talking about. So
you're arguing with real-world logic with comic book logic.
That's the thing. I get that that's silly, and Christopher Priest's run on Justice League is maybe the most boring comic book run I've ever read because it is just trying to say, okay, how can we take a goofy comic book concept and make it believable and root it in science? And I'm like, why would anybody do that? Why are you trying to explain the Green Lanterns traveling through space and how that works with the law of relativity? Nobody cares. How are you?
It's comics. We get away from realism.
And ladies and gentlemen, Deadpoolzilla's here. Yay!
Yay! But there's like a part in the Priest Justice League run where the Flash is like, how can I'm out in space where there's no friction. I'm like, okay, cool real world concept. How are you going to come up with a comic book idea to get us there? And then he's like explaining like real world science and blending it with this stuff, and I'm like, no, like I don't
You're not
care
the
if you
Christopher Priest.
Yeah, the Christopher Priest run. It's like I don't. And his, by the way, his writing of the Flash is terrible because it's just nonstop techno babble, and I can't read it. It's awful. But
It's stuff like Deathstroke.
I haven't read his Deathstroke, so I don't know. But I guess I've gone on for way too long. But that's sort of my grievances with the Flash is that I feel like we want to have our cake and eat it too, and I think that in order to like we can't have him approaching speeds of light and actually have him having villains that are smart, that are dumb enough to keep recurring. So, yeah, that's I'm done now.
Okay.
Right.
Sorry. Can I just say a quick thing?
Yeah, go ahead, Doc.
I was just gonna say, a solution I always thought you could have for the if he's so fast, how does he lose to anybody thing is, you can get the way I would work around that is give him super speed, but don't give him super strength. Like, just make him give him like the average strength of your typical person.
Well, Doc, there is such a thing as wind resistance.
Yeah, that's true.
The thing that I kind of like is that he doesn't actually, like, in my head, like, the Flash doesn't actually have super strength, but when he builds up enough momentum, it feels like super strength. And I think that's cool. And that's one of the things I like about super speed. Or, like, if you run fast enough and then take off, you cannot fly, but you can, like Superman, make tall, like, big leaps.
Or
Single bound.
And that's what I like is that they're like when you really think about it, super speed, I think, almost outclasses super strength in regards to if you built up, like, it's like going off like a gun. A bullet can't kill you if you're just, like, touching it. But if it's flying at you over 100 miles an hour, it'll put your brains all over the place.
Yeah, exactly.
I can't wait to talk about the logic of speed and time travel. That's going to be fun.
That's why I put
fun.
vulnerability above strength, honestly.
Another solution I would offer is just make more of his villains like speed and time based. I guess like
No.
Yeah, we will get into that, Doc. We will get into that because
speed-based powers like are the only other way you can combat that is either with speed powers or with time powers. And if you want to avoid time travel stuff,
you're missing the point of the rogues, then, Doc.
Yeah.
No, I'm just saying, like, I mean, as much as I love like Captain Cold and Grodd and stuff, there's only so many ways you can contrive ways for Flash to lose to them.
Not really. Grodd controls his mind and he can't move.
Yeah.
So,
you know what's faster than
speed? So just to defend the Flash's rogues who are not speedsters, the whole point of the rogues is that they have powers that don't like necessarily counteract super speed, except for Captain Cold's powers. But the thing is, they have strength in numbers, so even if you are faster than light, you still can't be in more than two places at once. And so something in Jeff Johns' run, which is a run that I'm sure I'm going to refer back to frequently, is that none of the Flashes can go from 0 miles per hour instantly to light speed, except for like Savitar in the TV show. But that's kind of irrelevant, because that's not in the comics. But the Flash is limited by his morality, because there's a great scene in, I think, book 4 of Jeff Johns' Flash run with Wally, where he hears a shot go off in a crowd during this Flash parade. And so he's running around the crowd, weaving between people to try to find the bullet before it hits somebody. And he notes that he's barely moving faster than the speed of sound, because if he were to move too fast, he's, weaving back and forth, ducking back and forth. Instantly, he would ram into somebody and completely flatten them. So his morality and the situations that he's in limit pretty reasonably the amount of speed that he can dish out in one sort of sitting. And just to go back to what Connor was saying about Captain Cold, the thing about Captain Cold, and sort of the reason why I appreciate Francis Manapul and Brian Buccellato making him a metahuman in the New 52, is that it's not that Captain Cold has a gun that shoots ice. Captain Cold is the man who's mastered absolute zero, which on the atomic level means there's no movement. And speed is all about movement. So Captain Cold is somewhat of a reverse Flash, in the sense that his gun and his metahuman powers in the New 52 slow down atomic movement so he can see the Flash and beat the Flash up. So when he's not a metahuman, the cold gun emits sort of like a wide beam that's a cold field that slows everything down. So even if the Flash is running at light speed, the cold gun is still going to slow him down. But just to sort of get back to what we were doing, Red, why don't you?
Oh, I was going to say. Oh, I'm sorry, Jake. I was just going to add on to what you were saying about when Wally was running through the crowd. It's actually it's cool when we see a power used against someone. Because it's not Flash, but it is like in Top Cow's Cyber Force. There's this character called Velocity, and it's funny, in the Justice League crossover they did, she's running so fast because she's trying to get away from or try to take her mind off of a death she just suffered. But then she has to realize she has to slow down because she's crying and her tears are the speed and velocity of her movement is going to make her tears like bullets to people around her.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, and that's a cool detail. So
Sorry,
Tyler, just because you jumped in, what we were doing is we were sort of going round robin, where you guys would list off sort of how you got into the Flash, sort of your best thing, worst thing about the character in the universe, and then how you would write the character or build the universe if you were given the opportunity to write the title without any constraints of the previous continuity. So while you think on that, let's go to Red Leader Antilles for his thoughts on those three things.
Yeah, and before I say that, I just want to say also Multiplex and Mirror Master have the advantage of duplication, essentially,
Yeah.
which, no matter how fast you are, you can't be two places at once, or 50 if you're in a, House of Mirrors. But to the questions, I don't remember specifically when I first encountered Flash, though I guess in terms of actually consuming media specifically focused on him, it would definitely be his cameos in Arrow and then his subsequent show. I didn't actually start reading Flash comics until maybe a year ago, and even then, I have a limited amount of experience with that stuff. But then, to the best thing, worst thing, I guess, the thing that's really cool about the Flash is just how intrinsically linked the character is to legacy, more than any other DC character.
Yeah.
Because you have the Green Lanterns, and they also have a massive legacy. But despite the fact that Green Lantern ring literally finds the next person, rarely do we actually have a direct transition between the two. While the Flash always has some level of that. Even between Earth 1 and Earth 2, Barry's reading a Jay Garrick comic when he, is about to get his powers, and he looks at it, he's like, oh, I'll, dress up just like him. Like, there's a progression there between the Golden Age to the Silver Age to the Bronze Age to the Modern Age, and to the Dark Ages in there briefly, and just that's something super cool about Flash that's exemplified more than with any other legacy hero.
So if you were writing The Flash, how would you sort of deal with that legacy? Where would be sort of your jumping off point for readers?
What do you mean by jumping off point?
Like, where would you start a run on The Flash?
On some level, I'd like the challenge of trying to make Barry more interesting and starting, a little bit before Wally becomes Kid Flash. Though, ideally, it would also be pretty cool to do something when you have Barry, Wally, Jay, Bart, and Jesse Quick, and all those other Flashes in the early 2000s, and kind of have all of them together at once.
Yeah.
I'd be curious. Sorry, Jake. Go ahead.
No, go ahead, Joel.
I'd be curious because I feel like everyone says that Barry's not interesting, and what makes him, and when they try to make him interesting, they just make him Wally West. I'm used to Wally West because of the DCAU, and Jake, you watch the Flash show more than me. Would you say that the Barry Allen in that show is more Wally West than he is actually Barry Allen?
Yeah, absolutely. They borrow pretty much all of Wally's good characteristics and then just absorb the whole "my mom died" thing from Flash Rebirth. And so before we get to you, Deadpoolzilla, what you think about the sort of three things, Red, I completely agree that to me, like, I look at writing Barry Allen as a challenge because I think the only person who's done it well is Jeff Johns, which it's so interesting that Johns co-wrote a lot of those first episodes of the CW Flash show where they borrow all these traits from Wally, but whatever. So
or we could argue that the first few episodes are the only time when we actually deal with the fact that Barry is intelligent.
Yeah,
which,
that's
honestly,
true.
that's one thing I'll add. If I was writing Flash, I would definitely bring back that kind of science factoid of the week thing that you got in the Gardner Fox era.
Oop, Doc, you're shuffling a little bit.
Yeah, Red, I completely agree. The two things that Jeff Johns really wanted to convey as sort of like the sort of weaknesses in Barry's character when he brought him back after Flash Rebirth were, well, the first thing to refer to the lateness is that time was a really big part of Jeff Johns' Volume 3 Flash, which only had like 12 issues to it, which is in between Flash Rebirth and Flashpoint, because that book dealt specifically with how the fastest man alive deals with how people in today's contemporary society deal with time and like busyness. Because to think about things in a contemporary context, we all text each other instead of calling each other. And we all assume that it's because we're busy, or at least we make that excuse. But is that something that we should really be busy enough to not reach out to our family members? And so that was one of the key things that that was sort of dealt with in Johns' Volume 3 Flash with Barry before it got cut short by Flashpoint, is even the fastest man alive is just as busy and has as little time as any of us. He has so much on his plate, like the rest of us do, that he doesn't have the time, or at least that's the excuse he's giving himself, that he doesn't have the time to, plan on a schedule and be to places on time. That's the reason. It's not something of he tries to conceal his secret identity by being late all the time, because in reality that would only draw attention to it. But the other thing that Jeff Johns introduced is that Barry may be the fastest man alive, and yes, that doesn't mean he has all the time in the world to do everything he wants, but he's emotionally slow. So the sort of retcon to his character in Rebirth was that before he got struck by lightning, he was so distant from other people. He was so involved in his mother's case that he wasn't really living as himself. But when he got struck by lightning, that sort of, shook him out of that emotional stillness to where he started connecting with people again, to where he went out with Iris and they eventually got married. And he started reconnecting with people through his powers. And so his Flash, powers sort of get rid of that emotional slowness and stillness that he had, even though that's something that he still has to sort of work and overcome during the Volume 3 Flash run. So since I've just blurred down for a while, Deadpoolzilla, why don't you give us your answers to those 3 questions from earlier?
Okay, so first off, apology because I just jumped in. So sorry for that earlier.
No, it's fine.
It's all good.
It's kind of funny because I'm actually I was telling Jake this, that I'm doing a Flash fan fiction set in the Teen Titans animated universe. So this is all going to be helpful for writing this. But I guess for me, how I got into reading the Flash was it actually started with the DC animated universe with, of course, Wally, and reading a few comics, because I don't actually own a lot of Flash comics. I mean, hell, the only thing I have in trade is a bunch of collected classic stories of the Rogues. But I do love the character, and going back to what Red said about, the Flash has this general connection to, legacy than more. Hell, it's a fucking family, How many... It's an actual family. The only one that's close to that is, either Batman or Green Arrow. But more so than...
Kind of Superman.
Well, kind of...
If clones count.
Of course they do.
Really, it feels more like a family because everyone's more it's actual bloodlines, in a weird way.
Mm-hmm.
But in regards to what I would do, where I would go with the Flash, I guess I would like to bring back what Red said, is more of the scientific aspect, or the dude's actually smart. I can't believe they've forgotten about that in Flash. I'd like to bring back that. I'd like to do more Wally-centric stuff, something they've been kind of throwing under... Well, they've been bringing back slowly in Rebirth, but you could argue it's minuscule at best. And honestly, I just want to do a Grodd story. That's really all I want to do. I can't really think on the fly what I would do, a giant run, because it's not like with Spider-Man where I have a giant run in mind. With Flash, it would be all I really have is a Grodd story, and that's it.
Well, that's all right. That's what we're here for. We're here to bounce ideas off of each other. So I guess I'll go and answer those questions. So my introduction to the Flash was through the TV shows, through the Justice League and Justice League Unlimited TV shows, as well as Teen Titans. Although I don't really remember watching the Wally West stuff when I was a kid. I remember when that show was doing reruns when I was in high school. I remember watching that, but like a lot of us here, I was introduced to these characters through the adaptations, through the TV shows, through the movies. Unfortunately, there wasn't a movie that had Flash in it until last year, and we all know how that turned out. But the Flash TV show, specifically the first like 9 episodes of the first season, I thought were really, really good and a really cohesive piece. And I thought that they had such a good hold on Barry Allen and Eobard Thawne in those first 9 episodes. And so I went out and bought comics for that, because in 2014, that was the year the Flash TV show came out. I remember that I had went to the comic shop to go and get some just random stuff, and I picked up a couple issues of Batman and Justice League of the current runs that were going on, and I didn't know what the fuck was happening. So then I didn't go back, and I was thinking about buying some trades, but then school started, so I didn't really have the time, and then the Flash TV show came on, and I loved it. And so when I went back to the comic shop after the mid-season finale of the Flash had just aired, I had picked up the beginning of the New 52 Flash run by Francis Manapul and Brian Buccellato. And I thought that was really, really good as well. So that was what sort of bridged me into the Flash comics. That and sort of hearing about how sort of like momentous and amazing of runs that Jeff Johns and Mark Waid had. A lot of people had told me that Waid's run was a lot better because he focused on the Flash family and really softened Wally West's, sort of edges as a character that he had from the Teen Titans run during the 80s. But then I just started collecting stuff as much as I could. I pretty much got all the New 52 stuff in trade when that was coming out. And then when season 2 of The Flash rolled around and they were doing Zoom, I had some reservations about that character, but I loved the aesthetics and all that stuff, and I wanted to read, his introduction in the comics, and so I ended up picking up The Flash Volume 2. I think it's issues 197 to 200, which details Hunter Zolomon's sort of transition into Zoom, and then I got the issues for Rogue War, which are the Flash Volume 2 issues 220 to 225, which are the conclusion to Jeff Johns' run on the Wally West Flash. And so I got those, and then I realized that DC was recollecting everything in books, so I started working backwards and getting the beginning of that run. So that's sort of how I was introduced to the Flash and how I started reading him. And as far as the best thing and worst thing goes, I think for all of us, we're all sort of brought into that universe and enticed by the powers, right? Like when you're a kid, usually when you look at Superman, you
Or
don't
the colorful
like,
costumes. Or the colorful...
Yeah, it's like you don't like Superman usually when you're like a kid who's under 6 or 8 or whatever, because he's like this moral paragon. You look up to him because he has the powers and because he does good things with those powers. So it starts
Think
at
of that awesome cowlick.
Yeah, so it starts in the place of the powers, and so that's how you get into it. And then over time, you realize what great characters these people are. And so that's really been the journey that I've had with Wally West. I love Bart Allen and I love Barry Allen, but Wally West is the superior Flash. So that's why I'm hoping in Flash War, which is being released right now in the DC Rebirth, or I guess DC Universe comics right now, that they don't shaft Wally West, because he's the best. He's the best Flash. And the most powerful Flash. Yeah, they totally will. Which I'm already fuming at the seams because I know it's going to be coming. But my worst thing is, I guess 2 things. Sort of like the continuity of the Flash, because the super speed is explained as not being like a self-generated thing, except for in the case of Flash Rebirth, which I'm sure we'll talk about. but it's these characters tap into this extra dimensional energy source in the Speed Force that gives them their powers. And because the Flash has been at the forefront of pretty much every crisis and big event that DC has had regarding their continuity, the continuity of the Flash and the way that his powers work have varying explanations to it, which can be kind of confusing. And so that can lead to a lot of misconceptions about the character and about his rogues as well, and the way that his speed works and whatnot. But my other, I guess, sort of worst thing about the universe, and something that I would definitely change in my own sort of run in the Flash, is making Barry incompetent. And this is something that the TV show is really bad about, where, you know, Barry needs help to do everything, not only to motivate him morally to be a good person, but also physically on how to use his powers. Like, he has to constantly call people or use his earpiece or do whatever just to figure out how to use his super speed in a way that will get him out of the situation. And in my mind, that defeats the purpose of the Flash TV show focusing on Barry Allen or Wally West or Bart Allen. Because the purpose of sort of creating Barry Allen in the 50s as a Flash who succeeded Jake Garrick is that we created a guy with super speed who was a scientist, so he could use these pseudoscience explanations for how to use his super speed in ways that just weren't running around. And so that was sort of the sell, that was sort of the pitch for creating Barry Allen originally at the end of the Golden Age, is that we have a guy who cannot just run fast, but he can do all these other things with the super speed. And so giving Barry, I think, a team in his early years is not a bad thing, especially if it's Eobard Thawne, who is in secret sort of orchestrating these events in order to set Barry Allen up to become this great hero. But you really got to be careful to make sure that Barry Allen is independent and self-sufficient, and that he doesn't have to rely on people just to come up with a way on how to phase or how to rotate his arms at super speed to get rid of a fire or things like that. But the other sort of part of his character that I think needs some fine-tuning is the whole death of his mother thing. And I think we can all agree on that, because when Barry Allen was brought back and when he was introduced in the TV show, once you got past sort of the first couple episodes that Jeff Johns was co-writing, a lot of the criticisms that were thrown at the show and at the comics were that Barry Allen is kind of one-dimensional because the only thing he's doing is dealing with the death of his mother, right? Like, that is the entire impetus for Flashpoint, is that the reverse,
And that has never been done before.
right, is that the Reverse Flash, this enemy from my future, decided to ruin my past by killing my mom. So that would, you know, set me behind in terms of the moral and character development that would get me to become the Flash eventually. Excuse me. So when you're writing Barry Allen, in my mind, well, actually, you know, because now we're sort of getting into the ideas that I want to bounce off you guys. I guess I can say that, just like Red, I want to sort of challenge myself and start out with writing Barry, because I think, and this isn't necessarily true, but in order to have my own sort of peace of mind, in order to have a seminal, successful run on Wally West, you have to first establish and develop who Barry Allen is and who Iris West are as characters, and develop who they are as heroes before you can really get to Wally West. Because, like you mentioned, Red, Flash is the sort of seminal legacy character in not just DC Comics, but in comics in general. And so if you're going to have Wally West sort of challenge and sort of change the way that the Flash and his family sort of works in the context of the Gem Cities, at least for me, I want to have my own headcanon of how those things were established in the first place. So the ideas that I've been toying with lately deal primarily with Wally, or Barry, excuse me, because I think, for the most part, I want to stick to what Jeff Johns did with Wally West, because he did such a good job with that character, and Mark Waid too. So the sort of jumping off point where I would start my run is pretty much where Joshua Williamson started his Rebirth one, Rebirth run, in 2016, where Barry has been the Flash for a while, and he has just proposed to Iris, so she's his fiance, and they're going to be married soon, in like a year or so. And we pick up at this point in Barry's career and life as the Flash because Iris's nephew has just been struck by lightning. And so now Barry has to deal with training this protege in the fastest city in the Midwest, in Central City, where sort of people are wanting to go faster, wanting downloads faster. No one has time for everything. Speed is something that today, we're trying to do everything faster. And as our society, quote unquote, progresses, everyone is wanting to do things faster. Everyone is texting, using social media and all this stuff. And so he's having to raise this kid, mentor this kid in this society, as he himself is having to deal with how does the fastest man alive sort of practice what he preaches with, the communication with his family and things like that. So that's sort of where I would pick up. But to go back to the mother thing for a second, Barry is an adult character, so he doesn't necessarily need his parents around. But to be completely honest, I haven't decided whether or not I want, in my own sort of continuity, to have the Reverse Flash kill his mom. Because I think you just have a really hard time balancing the eternal optimism of Barry Allen with the tragic backstory. Because the whole point of Barry Allen as a Silver Age hero is that he doesn't need tragedy in order to be a good hero. But if I was going to make that choice, I would have his dad die as well. And this is something that I read had happened, but I don't think actually did, where Thawne killed his mom and then his dad went to prison for his murder. But then while his dad was in prison, after Barry gets his powers, but before he can defeat the Reverse Flash and try to get a confession out of him to release his dad has a heart attack in prison and dies.
I've heard that as well. I have no idea where that's from.
Yeah, to be honest, I don't think it's from anything, but I think that's a really good idea, even though I am sort of skeptical to bring Barry down into this tragic place, because that would really harden his resolve to sort of quote-unquote get Reverse Flash and get this confession and sort of realize
I'd like to jump in when you're done.
Sorry, Joel, I'm almost finished. And sort of realize that justice isn't about getting somebody out of prison, but justice is doing what's right because it's the right thing to do, right? It's not about getting that consequence, a good consequence of getting his dad out of prison. It's getting justice for his dad, even though his dad is no longer with us.
I just like to say, just to jump onto your point, Jake, about the tragedy. You could play it as, and this is just a very vague thing. No details, I'm afraid. That's just how I roll sometimes with my creative process. But you could say that maybe that would make Barry even, I don't want to say not interesting, but, sort of he's still an optimist even with all this tragedy hitting him. But it's sort of you can look up to that because sort of you keep getting hit and hit and hit, but you're still smiling, you're still strong. I mean, you look at people who go through hardships or disabilities or stuff like that, but yet, sometimes they're still smiling, they're still optimistic, they're still trying to see the good in the world, and maybe that.
I have a few suggestions to actually springboard off of that. What you're describing to me in terms of Barry trying to teach this kid how to ethically use powers and all that sort of stuff, that reminds me quite a bit of, and it's not a ripoff, but it is kind of similar to what Tomasi and Gleason are doing or did with Superman, and giving him a son. Because one of the great things about that run is that Superman is a completely unchanging character. He is just a moral paradigm the entire time. And it is the best run on Superman I've ever read because everything New 52 is completely awful. So the thing is, with that, New 52, we had Superman say booty call. In Rebirth, we had Superman helping his son. And like there's actually a two-part story recently where it was actually written by James Robinson, and it's a little story called The Last Days. And one of the most interesting things about that was in the second issue, at the end, like a planet blows up, and John is just really sad because a lot of people on there were very religious and wanted to die because they felt like it was like their religious fate. And like he asks his dad if he believes in God. And then there's a moment where Superman just kind of has a moment of reflection, and it's just a very cool moment, and it felt human, and it felt like an actual person, not trying to say, here's what my beliefs are, son, here's what you're supposed to believe, but it is, here's kind of what I'm thinking, and if you think that, okay, but if you don't, that's also cool. And it's just this really wonderful moment. And one of the things about that run that's cool is that we as the audience are supposed to identify with John because we, compared to Superman, are children morally. And that's really, really cool. And
Right.
And so having him so comparing that to what you're proposing, what I would propose is that Wally is somebody who is constantly engaging in tragedy, and Barry as somebody who is teaching him, maybe hasn't had tragedy, but is still optimistic. And Wally, in spite of all of his tragedy, is still looking up to Barry and choosing to be the eternal optimist as well. And maybe fortunate enough to have not had all the tragedy that Wally has, but Wally, and maybe that's how we're supposed to identify with Wally. And that's what keeps us invested in him. That's just an idea.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, part of it is, so basically where my sort of continuity is picking up to talk about it more concretely is that Barry has been the Flash for about 6 years. And so he's like entering his 6th or 7th year of being the Flash when Wally gets his powers. And so, the whole thing about Wally West is that because he's my sort of like my favorite Flash, and I'm wanting to keep some stuff about his history intact, is that he gains like a decade of experience as Kid Flash and with the Titans before he becomes the Flash. But once he does, he has his own antagonist in the form of Hunter Zolomon, who comes at him saying, you never experienced tragedy the way that Barry Allen did, so I'm going to make you experience tragedy to make you into the hero that Barry was. So that sort of eventual conflict is the thing that's sort of driving me to keep some of the continuity with Barry's mother dying and him having to overcome this tragedy and be optimistic in light of it. Because eventually, if that's not the case with what came before, then Hunter's conflict with Wally is kind of shallow. And I don't want to change a lot about that because I think that stuff with Blitz and what happens during Jeff Johns' entire run with Hunter Zolomon is really, really good and really solid. And that's what I think makes Hunter a better antagonist for the Flash than Eobard Thawne. So that's sort of like holding me back from eliminating the tragedy in Barry Allen's life. But I know for sure that, like Wally's a kid, and the issues that Wally has to overcome are, even as Kid Flash, are the fact that he's emotionally impulsive, where he sort of flips on a dime, like we would sort of expect the Joker to, where he's super angry one minute, super sad the next, and super happy the next. That's kind of who Wally West is. Like, he gets too angry sometimes. He loves too easily. That's why he has all of those, flings that are, he thinks are relationship, but in reality are flings when he's Kid Flash and then in his first years as the Flash. So in terms of Wally West, I'm focusing on his character as Kid Flash, as this kid who's really rough around the edges, that Barry not only has to teach to use his powers appropriately, but also how to sort of smooth things out. But at the same time, so the three main characters of the sort of run I'm planning that starts with Barry and Kid Flash are Barry, Iris, and Wally. And so while Barry teaches him to be Kid Flash, Iris teaches him to be Wally West. And with the Flashes, the line between their identities is really blurred because unlike Batman, they don't act a certain way based on the audience they have. But it's really important for me to have Iris there as the second, main character, as somebody who's a mentor for Wally, also teaching him how to be this morally upright citizen.
So connecting to that, I was going to ask, with the tragedy point, what will you do something similar to Iris's death in, what was it, Trial of the Flash?
Yeah. So, it's funny you ask about that because Barry Allen's run in the comics starts with him getting his powers. And then a couple years in, he gets Kid Flash. And then his run ends after the 2-year trial on the Flash with him sort of going off into the future for his retirement and then returning in time for Crisis on Infinite Earths, where he sacrifices himself to save the multiverse. And Iris's history is a little convoluted in that. Because, so what happens is that Barry and Iris go to this costume party where Barry is dressed as the Flash, of course, and Iris is dressed as Batgirl. And Iris goes to the bathroom or something, and Thawne is there, and then he kills her by vibrating his hand through her head. And then afterwards, Barry is going to get remarried to this woman named Fiona Webb, and while Thawne is running up to her trying to kill her the same way he killed Iris, Barry runs up behind him and clotheslines him in super speed and snaps his neck, which kicks off the trial of the Flash. But then it's revealed retroactively that Iris isn't dead and that she was a secret, almost sort of sleeper agent citizen of the 30th century, which is why after the trial of the Flash is resolved, they go to the 30th century, and then Barry comes back and sacrifices himself. So I haven't decided how I want to sort of clean that continuity up, because that's what I was talking about earlier, all this convoluted continuity and shit with time travel that can get really hard for people to wrap their brains around.
I'm a Doctor Who fan, Jake. I know what that's like.
I know, but I'm speaking more to general audience members, somebody, because the whole goal is to start this Flash run at a point that's accessible for people to streamline everything while respecting the continuity that's come before, but give them a new starting off point that's accessible and makes sense. And so I don't want to do what they did with Iris. And to be honest with you, I don't know if I want to have her die and have Barry be, remarried, because that sort of throws all the tension and all the great stuff that they had in their relationship out the window. So sort of what I'm thinking of is that, Barry kills Thawne and has the trial in the Flash moment, but almost immediately after that, Crisis on Infinite Earths happens and he sacrifices himself, but Iris stays there. So she dies, or he dies, but she's still around to sort of help Wally. And so it's interesting that you went there, Red, because that's the very tail end of Barry's tenure as the Flash. And I haven't gotten that far yet because I'm still trying to build up, sort of the beginning of it.
Actually, that creates a interesting thing where you're essentially going to have to, if you're keeping Crisis, you're going to essentially have to write 2 different Earths.
Right.
So when your run begins, when it's still in Earth 1, will Jay be from Earth 2? And then you'll...
Yes.
So when Crisis happens in your run, that's when those timelines converge.
Yes. So yes, I love Jay Garrick, and yes, the Flash is a legacy character, and yes, Jay Garrick needs to come before Barry Allen in a sense to help inspire him. And there's a great relationship between Barry and Jay, but in my mind, Barry is somewhat the most important Flash. Again, I love Wally, but Barry is almost the most important. And also just thinking about things from Thawne's perspective, what justification would there be, for Eobard Thawne to become the reverse of Barry Allen if he's not the first Flash, right? Because, and yeah, you could give some explanation of, Jay Garrick started everything, but then Barry expanded it, but that kind of throws Jay under the bus. And to be honest with you, I'm not even sure if I want all the Earths to converge at the end of Crisis, because I think the multiverse needs to stay intact in order for some stuff to happen during Wally's run. But at least in my mind, Barry Allen is the first Flash on Earth 1. Wally West succeeds him, and then I'll talk about what I want to happen after Wally West and who I want Wally West to train. But Jay Garrick is the Flash of Earth 2, and maybe Jesse Quick is on that Earth, or maybe she's on Earth 3 or another Earth or whatever. But even though Jay and Barry have this relationship, and they meet with each other and they cross Earths all the time, Jay needs to be on Earth 2.
Can I just jump in and say that when you do start introducing that crisis stuff, do it slowly, because as I consider myself a general audience member when it comes to this stuff, and this multiverse stuff already makes my head itch. Like, wait, where Earth are we on now? Where we are? Where are we?
Well, so Crisis would come at the end of Barry's tenure as the Flash, and so when we pick up in this continuity that I'm building, Barry has been the Flash for 6 years. So some key things have happened in his history that sort of lead into what happens with Wally. So I think through this conversation, I've realized that I need to have his mom die and his dad die too. So we're going to say that happens. The other thing, which I'll clarify in detail because I'm sure you guys have questions about this, is the Team Flash from the TV show sort of loosely happens, and it happens over the span of like 2 years. And I'll give some more context to that because there's certainly some things that happen there that I don't want to happen. But pretty much the Flash of Two Worlds happens. So Barry has already met Jay, established a relationship with Jay, knows about the multiverse, knows about the infinite Earths, and crosses over to Earths and has these adventures with Jay before this happens. The other key thing to deal with the time aspect is that the way I'm handling Eobard Thawne is sort of the way that I thought the TV show was going to handle it, wherein Eobard Thawne in the future becomes the Reverse Flash after Barry Allen, at the end of his career, right before Crisis, accidentally travels to the future and inspires him to become the Reverse Flash. So what Thawne does is he travels back in time to meet Barry Allen, but he does it in like the reverse sort of way. So like what I mean is, let's say that Barry becomes the Flash in 2020 and his career lasts until 2032. Thawne goes back and meets Barry Allen, I guess for the second time, in 2032, and then progressively goes back further and further in time to earlier in Barry's career. So while Barry's arc is happening in real time, progressing forward in that, you know, sort of decade or I guess 15-year span, Thawne's arc is happening in the reverse. So they're both developing as characters, but it's happening in reverse at the different times. So what was great about the TV show, which I would pull, is that Thawne is at the end of his career sort of manipulating but also inspiring Barry to become the Flash in the beginning of his career. And then at the end of Barry's career, he inspires Thawne to become the Reverse Flash unknowingly. So you have that nice sort of reversal of the relationships. And so that's how I would deal with Thawne. So when we pick up, when Barry is training Wally, we know a couple things. We know that the Reverse Flash will always be a threat because he's a time traveler. And I'll talk about the way I want to explain time travel too, because I think there's a way to streamline it and streamline the Speed Force that would make sense, but also not step out of the continuity that sort of came before. So we know that the Reverse Flash will always be around. We know that every time we run into the Reverse Flash, it's a younger, less experienced version of Thawne, because from Thawne's perspective, he's traveling back to Barry's earlier years so we can have more of an impact. So that's the second thing. And then the third thing is that we know that Barry, with the help of his team, within the first 2 years of his tenure as the Flash, defeated Thawne And so we know that moving forward, we can't reveal the information that, happened during Barry's first few years as the Flash, because that will set Thawne off to, manipulate the timeline in other ways. But also something that doesn't really happen anymore that needs to happen is Barry and Thawne need to fight across time and space. That's something that's really been lost in recent years. Jeff Johns had this great moment where in his Volume 3 run, at the end of issue 8, where Thawne remarked that Isaac Newton came up with this third law of relativity, where every positive has to have a negative, after seeing Barry fight the Reverse Flash, because Thawne went back in time to kill Albert Einstein and Barry had to stop him. So I would like the creative freedom there to keep Thawne traveling across space and time, dealing with other people, dealing with Barry, and trying to manipulate history in different eras, and Barry has to stop him with the help of Kid Flash.
I have a question for you about the time travel thing. What kind of laws are you operating on? Are you operating on a timeline that anything can change, or are you operating under the whole idea that this was always going to happen no matter what? Like, they were always going to go back in time because Thawne was going to try and kill Einstein, and then that adventure happened.
The predetermined timeline.
Yeah,
the predestination thing is a little bit tricky. So time travel in and of itself is tricky, but I'm thinking about it in the context of what don't I want to do, because Flashpoint, problematic as it is, in terms of it's not really a Flash story, it's a DC Universe story. It's problematic because at the end of the day, Barry Allen learns not to travel through time because there are physical, tangible consequences to changing the timeline, being you can screw up history, being you erase yourself from existence. And to me, having physical, tangible consequences to changing the timeline eliminates the need for having a moral reason for not traveling through time. So the way I'm thinking about time travel is you go back in time and change something, you don't erase yourself from existence. All you do is you create a new timeline that sort of paves over the old one, but you still exist in the same capacity that you did previously. So in that sense, Eobard Thawne does become a living paradox because he travels through time freely, whereas Barry has, a moral reason for not wanting, to do it. So that's sort of how I'm explaining time travel, because I don't want there to be a physical, tangible reason for the Flashes to, not travel through time, because if the consequence to not traveling through time is, I erase myself from existence, that's a pretty, what's the word?
Universal reason?
No, yes, it's a universal reason, but it's also kind of cheap because you want to keep things as character-driven as you can when you're dealing with space-time. And so having, a plot reason of, I eliminate myself, it's like the Novikov self-consistency principle, that kind of eliminates any character reason for the Flashes not to travel through time.
Well,
does that make sense for you guys?
I think so.
Yeah.
So you don't want somebody in your little critic room saying, "Hey, how come they don't travel back in time to kill Hitler, stop World War II, all that good stuff."
Right, but the principle of the unpredictability of time travel is still there.
Right.
Thawne has a great line during season 1 of The Flash where he says, how many people could die if your mother lives, which sort of gets at the principle of if you try to eliminate a bad thing from happening in time, you still can't really control whether a good thing or a bad thing, sort of fills that event's shoes. So
right,
when
I
you
like that
replace
idea.
a bad
And
thing,
the fact that by erasing a timeline, certain people aren't born and whatnot, you're essentially killing people.
Yeah.
And yet
yeah,
he still does
exactly.
that at the end of season 2.
Yeah, he
Exactly,
murdered
and
Deagle's
so
daughter.
and so that's sort of Barry's reason for trying to be like a protector of the timeline and stopping Thawne from changing everything. Because for Thawne, because there is no problem with self-consistency with the way I'm explaining time travel, Thawne can control events to the T. He can eliminate people if they're going to make a good thing happen instead of a bad thing. So the only problem that you run into there is, well, why doesn't Thawne kill Barry Allen? Because the explainer in Flashpoint is if he kills Barry, the Speed Force won't be around and the Flash legacy won't be around for him to manipulate it in the future. But the explainer that I'm going to give is that Thawne became the reverse of Barry, not to become his equal, but because he thinks he's become better. So he leaves the Flash and the Flash family intact and doesn't kill them because he knows he's better than them. So he doesn't need to kill them.
Right. Here's something else I need to bring up. Again, with time travel. I'm sorry if I'm confusing you, Jake, with the whole time travel thing. But something about I've always kind of liked this idea also of sort of like the universe itself would always fix things in the end. I don't want to use that as like a cheap writing tool, but like I've seen stuff where somebody saved a life in the past who was supposed to die. And, that messed up things big time. There were consequences to that. But at the end, that person who they saved eventually did die because they were always supposed to die. It just didn't happen the way it originally happened. Like, the universe caught up with that person.
Yeah.
That kind of plays into the Days of Future Past part where Beast is like, time's like a river. You can alter its course, but eventually it's just going to go back to where it ultimately was going to go.
Sure, they were talking about Doctor Who, but that kind of works too, yeah.
And I'm not sure how I feel about that because giving the universe, or I guess more accurately, the Speed Force, like a sentience that will kind of undo or lead time into the events anyway, sort of demeans the power that speedsters have, which I guess sort of gets into the way I want to explain the Speed Force, because it shouldn't have a sentience to it, because there's no reason that this sentient thing that gives this power to people would ever give its power to people like Thawne, even if it's for quote-unquote balance, because it's not really balance, which is, and not to get into what Thanos was trying to do in Infinity War, but that's not really balance. So I think you run into some moral issues if you say that the Speed Force has sentience. But
can you say that to like 50% of the Star Wars fandom?
Gray Speed Forcers. Gray Speed Forcers.
Yeah, and what the comics is kind of going for now is that it's not a sentience, it's just a force that people tap into, which I think is what Star Wars should be. But
also, the still force is a thing now.
Yeah, which we don't really know about that, but that's a stupid premise anyway, so I don't want to get into that. But
the Speed
the
Force
way
is a still force, light, dark. Sorry.
Yeah, but the way I want to explain the Speed Force, and you guys can give your thoughts on this because I've been talking for a while, is it's not an extra dimensional force speedsters tap into, because I want to make them. I'm not sure how to word this. So the way that the thing that's confusing is that in the comics right now, the Speed Force is both the powers the Flashes have, but also the place they go to when they run faster than light. So they basically enter this sort of highway that connects all of space-time together.
So hypertime.
And
basically,
vortex. And that's okay, but I don't like the problems that arise because of that. I think it would be better to say that, you get struck by lightning and doused in electrified chemicals. That in and of itself doesn't open a portal in your body that allows you to tap into this extra dimensional energy source that's really vague and undefined anyway, because that's dumb. What happens is when Barry gets his speed and when Wally gets his speed, because the way that they get their speed is very similar, is that the processes in your body move faster. It's as simple as that. The things in your body, everything, every function of your body moves faster, which is
It's
why
your
you
biological clock.
right. It's like a biological thing. It's not I'm tapping into this energy source. It's biological. It's internal. So that's why I can't really explain the Speed Force as a place you go to, because the place is what gives people the powers in the comics. But that's not how I'm explaining it. You become a speedster by the way you get your powers, and you're not tapping into some source. It's you, it's your body. And so Connor, I think you said this, or maybe it was Doc, where like the Flashes should be able to use their mind with their speed. That's a really great power that happens in the Manipool Bushalato New 52 run. Which,
I agree. Yeah.
with Barry, which is a really great power, but also arguably makes Barry the most powerful speedster ever, which I think is fascinating. But I think I would save that using your mind, at least consistently all the time, for another speedster, which I'll talk about in a little bit. But that's kind of the way that I would explain it. So it's not you're tapping into the Speed Force. It's not like an afterlife thing. It's not you get sucked into it when you run too fast, because like the time travel thing, that eliminates all the character reasons for people making decisions. You want to make things as character driven as possible, and when you're doing it based on like the rules of the Speed Force, that kind of eliminates it. So when a speedster runs faster than the speed of light, they do sort of leave reality, and I haven't decided if I want to give that a name yet. If I would just call it hyper time or something like that. And that is still a highway that connects all of space-time, hence Barry being able to go over to Earth 2. But it's not the source of their powers. The source of their powers is them. And it's not like when Barry was struck by lightning, he created the Speed Force that every other speedster in the universe, including Eobard Thawne, taps into. It's not that. But I think that's sort of the explainer for how things would work, is sort of the plot. But sort of visually, something that's been confusing for a lot of people is Speedster's lightning and how that works. Because the lightning is basically like a byproduct of using the Speed Force. It's like, so like when you're moving, at those speeds, your body is producing a lot of excess heat. It's releasing the heat. The heat is represented in lightning, right? So the lightning color, however, represents how fast you are, right? And because there have been a lot of continuity issues, it's been hard to tell how much faster a speedster is than another speedster because of all this continuity issues. So the way I would explain this is, it's sort of this red shift, blue shift thing. I'm not sure if you guys know what this is, but it's if an object is moving at 10%, the speed of light is going to appear as red. If an object is moving at 20% the speed of light, it's going to appear as yellow. If it's moving at 30% the speed of light, it's going to be green. At 40% the speed of light, it's going to appear as blue. And then at 50% the speed of light, it's going to appear as indigo or purple. And anything that moves beyond 50% the speed of light is undetectable by the human eye, because that reaches outside of the light spectrum that we can see. So the way I would explain things is that there are sort of like stages of speed. So your lightning, yes, is the sort of heat, sort of compressing and changing as it's released from your body, but your lightning your lightning color is indicative of the top speed that you can reach. So the way I would explain things is because the red shift, blue shift, in reality, it's called red shift when it shifts away from red, but it's also called blue shift because it shifts towards the blue end of the spectrum. So if you are Barry Allen or Wally West or people in the Flash family, and you have a quote-unquote natural connection to the Speed Force, which is pretty much every speedster in the multiverse, your lightning is the progression, the stages work in blue shift. So you start off with red lightning because your tops, so it would work in 20% increments. So if your top speed is 20% the speed of light, your lightning is going to appear as red all the time. If your top speed is 40% the speed of light, your lightning is going to appear as yellow. If it's 60, green, 80, blue, and 100% indigo. That doesn't mean that you can't travel through time. You still can, but that's just sort of the way I'm sort of separating things. So you would move through those intervals. So Barry would have yellow lightning. So his top speed would be 40% the speed of light. And this is, again, if you have a positive or sort of natural connection or just a natural sort of, speed that's being produced by your body. Wally would have red, so he's slower than Barry. I toyed with Jay having blue, but I don't want him to be faster than Barry, so I would have him have yellow. And I would have Bart Allen have blue, and then John Fox have purple, indigo. Because John Fox is the Flash of the 27th century who succeeds Thawne in the 25th century. So all of those lightnings, it's sort of like a colorist thing, would appear as like white with like the color of the glow of that indicates your speed. So if you're Wally West, your lightning is white with like red, with like a red glow to it. If you're Barry Allen, there's more white in your lightning trail because you're faster, but your lightning color has changed to yellow. If you're Bart Allen, you're faster than Barry, and it's shown in the blue lightning, but it's also that there's more, like, I guess the way I can explain it is like the lightning streak itself shows your speed, because the faster you are, not only the color is going to change, but the more white is going to be present there. So because I'm not explaining things as like a negative or a positive speed force, how do you give Eobard Thawne red lightning and say he's as fast or faster than Barry Allen? The way I've explained it is that all the like sort of regular speedsters have like blue shift, but then Thawne, because he got his powers by reverse engineering the experiment that created Barry Allen's powers, is that his powers and a couple other speedsters, but only a few, have red shift. So they start out with purple or indigo lightning because their top speed is going to be 20% the speed of light. Then they move from indigo to blue, green, yellow, and red. So, but instead of having white as sort of the internal color, black would be the internal color. So when you have Thawne running around, he's faster than Barry for his entire career, and his lightning is black with the red glow. And
Nice
it's
use
really
of color
black.
coding, by the way.
Right, like it's so hard to explain this stuff, and there was kind of this explanation to it in the New 52 when Brett Booth was an artist on the book, when they had like 5 bajillion speedsters running around. But as far as explaining it in dialogue, this explanation isn't canon, but it is sort of visually. So I'm just sort of explaining like how it sort of works and how it should work within my own continuity. So that's pretty much it. Like as far as how the Speed Force works, like Thawne would be faster than Barry for his entire career, but Barry is so skilled and is so like practical with his powers that he's able to come up with things on the fly that can overcome Thawne.
You should have like a almost like a joke scene where like somebody like sits all the flashes down, like, okay, this is what color means, people. This is what the speed is. Like just sort of like this is how it all works. Kind of like a scene where everyone just sits down and just tries to understand it.
Right, and so a scene that I would have happen early on. In my continuity is Barry sort of explaining the way he perceives the Speed Force works, because Barry is not a master of the Speed Force. He's very skilled with his powers, but he's not a master of how the speed works, but Thawne is. So Barry wouldn't really know about the stages of speed or things like that, but Thawne would because he's from the future. So I think Thawne would really taunt Barry and Wally with how little knowledge they really have about the Speed Force and the way in which their powers work. And this is another thing, is that because the Speed Force isn't like an extra dimensional energy source that people tap into, people aren't going to have the same powers. So you're not going to have 24 Flash family members running around at the same time. Because when you get your powers, you're not tapping into this energy source, but rather the powers that you have are dependent on the way in which the accident that gave you these powers happened. So Barry, Wally, and Thawne all have very similar powers because the accidents that gave them their powers were all very similar. Barry's accident happened, and then Wally's was almost the exact same thing, but there were different chemicals present. So Wally's able to do different things with his speed that Barry couldn't. And then Thawne, using the knowledge of how other speedsters got their powers, was able to make himself the most powerful speedster in the 25th century, both in terms of speed and in skill and in the powers that he can have, because he can do pretty much anything speedsters can do except for some of the powers Wally has. So like the way in which you get your powers dictates like the eventual powers and the speed that you can have as well. That's another thing. Like and that's sort of the reason why I think Jay Garrick would be limited to only Yellow Lightning, is because his power, and Barry too, is because his power, like the accident didn't give him access to moving faster and faster and faster, but Thawne's did. So Thawne uses the future knowledge of biology, chemistry, and physics to allow himself to become the fastest speedster. Except for Wally. Wally would still be the fastest. He'd have White Lightning, and I've got a separate explainer for that. But do you guys have like questions or comments or changes you would make to some of the broad stuff that I've been explaining so far? Because I've been talking for a while.
I just kind of realized everything I've got planned for my fan fiction is now suddenly sounding like shit.
No, it's all good, because I've like when I started working on sort of this continuity, I started from a character place, but I'm like, all right, I have to stop and like figure out how these powers work, because when a speedster is around a Flash, like when you have more than one Flash around, they have to be visually distinct. You can't have what happened during the Return of Barry Allen and during after Rebirth 09, before Flashpoint, where you have two Flashes running around with the same color lightning, with basically the same color suit, and be looking to distinguish them based on the yellow ring around the suit or based on the shape of the belt. That isn't enough. You have to distinguish them through the color scheme, and that's tricky because the Flashes are the Scarlet Speedsters. So when Wally gets his suit, when Wally gets his powers, what Barry figures out is that because there were different chemicals present, his body isn't just producing speed or heat. His body is also like pushing these extra chemicals that were there in that electrified chemical bath outward of his body, which is producing this sort of like shiny, flexible, metallic armor. So when Wally uses his speed, he's sort of like creating his suit automatically. And it's a silver and red suit, so he's still the Scarlet Speedster, but he's got that sort of silver suit from the New 52 because that design is just so fucking good. Like, I can't pass up an opportunity to not use that suit.
Yeah.
I have a take on the Speed Force.
Go for it.
It doesn't go anything like yours, and I really just kind of pulled this out of my ass. So I apologize if it's not as if it's not a TED Talk like what Jake Carlson just gave us.
Sorry.
No, don't be.
TED Talk.
Yeah, like when I'm saying TED Talk, that's not a slam. That is a compliment. So what I think of is I do think of the Speed Force as a sort of sentient thing. Maybe not like it has a voice or anything, but maybe there's some weird animalistic will, some kind of cosmic will. Now, maybe this is because I was raised in like the church or something, so any sort of like extraordinary sort of thing, to me anyways, I always feel my natural place to go is through some weird semi-divine place with it. And I think that the way I can tie the Speed Force with divinity is, what if Zeus was the speedster way, way, way back when? And, Zeus lightning, Speed Force. Bam! There you go.
I would have gone Hermes, since
I would have gone with Hermes.
since that's what Jay based his design on.
Yeah.
Well, okay, sure. There you go. Hermes and Zeus, they both got hit by lightning or something. I don't
Pikachu.
get. The reason I say Zeus is because he's like the All Father in Greek mythology, or like
Yeah,
he's like
fucked everything.
yeah, and so that's why I that thing, anything that had a hole, man. So he was
he'd
James
make-
Bond before James Bond.
I
So
miss those deleted scenes in the Hercules movie from Disney.
man, but so that's what I'm trying to get at. So that's where I'd go. I know that Hermes is like the super fast one, but for the sake of convenience, I don't care. So when it comes to and when it does come to Hermes, maybe it's because my Wonder Woman is Brian Azzarello's Wonder Woman, and Hermes has like a staff that can basically teleport, and that's what makes him really fast. And I'm like, ooh, that's cool. But whenever I think of Zeus, I think of him throwing lightning and whatnot. Who knows? Maybe Zeus struck Hermes with lightning, no euphemism intended, and then that created him to be fast. I don't know. But that's irrelevant. So what I like to think of is I didn't know before this podcast that Impulse had this thing where he aged rapidly because of the Speed Force, right?
Yeah.
Is that what you're saying?
Yep.
Because that was kind of my idea for what I would do with the Flash thing. Is man, I guess I really like Impulse, right? So, but when it comes to my take on what I would do with the Flash is I would have it be I would retain Flash's character quirk that he is late, because that's what kind of Barry Allen's thing is. That's where a lot of the drama comes from, is the soap opera element.
Yeah.
Of, oh man, he just couldn't make it in time for the commercial break. So when it comes to that whole thing, I would make sure that he can't use the Speed Force all the time, and that's why he's late all the time.
That's an interesting way of justifying that.
And so, like, I remember I think it was Robert Venditti and Brett Booth's first issue on the Flash in New 52 is, like, he's like, well, you can't be
losing time.
I think it's a little scene outside of that part.
Okay.
It's a part where he's like, well, you can't be a forensic scientist, but you got to basically, like, kind of file all the old files or whatever. I think that's that issue. And then he's like, oh, this will take me weeks. And then he does it in like the snap of a finger. And I'm like, oh, that's cool. But then after a while, I'm like, well, now what's he going to do? So I think that having him not use the Speed Force because it causes him to age. And maybe he could like maybe start to apply some makeup, maybe a little foundation here and there to make himself look younger. But there's also like some actual ramifications of like, I'm not only getting closer to my death, but people could try to figure out who I am because, well, gee, you're certainly looking older, and so is the Flash. So what I would do is I would also have, like, the Speed Force is a thing that is inside of him, and it, like, I don't know how to best put this, like, he sweats it. Like, you know what I mean? Like, it's like a thing that his body, like, emits. And so because and this is how I would utilize Barry Allen being smart, he would find a way to harness the energy out of that as a way to not use the Speed Force himself, but whatever like residual sort of like crystallized version of the Speed Force is coming out of him, he can use that.
So he bottles the sweat.
He bottles the sweat, but also, now get this, he would have a Flash sickle and maybe a Flash mobile, and he would have all these awesome things, and maybe the cosmic treadmills run on this bottled sweat Speed Force. And so what we could also have some fun drama is maybe some people figure out about it and they steal the Speed Force from him. He's like, oh no, I got to get that stuff back. And so that's how I would sort of do something. And like maybe the Speed Force is sort of like a parasitic thing that is feeding off of his life while he's using it to save life. I think there is some kind of fun, ironic, divine, Greek mythic sort of stuff kind of happening there. That's sort of my take on what I would do with the Speed Force and like what I would do in a run with Flash. But I guess that's kind of a response to your idea of like the Speed Force.
No, that's really cool.
Every time you talk about the Speed Force, I just keep thinking of the actual Star Wars Force, and much like you, Connor, I just start going to Star Wars places with my stuff. So it's like, don't worry, I've been there. That's why you come. Sorry, no, go ahead.
No, Connor, that's a really cool idea. I haven't. The reason why I want to remove any sentience is because I don't necessarily want to take it to that sort of like pseudo divine place, because that's not
understandable.
Like who Barry Allen is as a character, and so I guess to sort of talk about the characters, because I've been talking about the Speed Force and time travel and the lightning and stuff, to talk a little bit more small scale, to refer to something I talked about earlier is Barry's early years as the Flash. So I haven't really figured out how I want to deal with Thawne's rationale for being there, but if I'm going to get rid of the whole, if you travel back in time and change something, you like basically remove yourself from existence, then I was like, well, crap, what reason does Thawne have to stay in the 21st century? Because the reason in the TV show is he goes back in time to kill Barry's mom because he's pissed at Barry, but then he loses his speed because of it, and then as fate would have it, he has to create the Flash in order to go home to the 25th century, which is some great irony, and I love that. But I think I would have to change it because of the way I'm explaining self-consistency as it not really being an issue. Is he's there because he wants to be the impetus for the Flash becoming the Flash. Like he wants to stroke his own ego, so in the Flash Museum they don't just have to say Eobard Thawne, Reverse Flash, one of the greatest enemies of the Flash. They say the guy who gave the Flash his speed. So that's sort of like his explanation. So what I would do is I would have Thawne sort of hire Caitlin Snow and Cisco Ramon and have that sort of compact Team Flash, at least on premise of the way the TV show has done it. But that said, once Barry sort of gets over his initial hump, he doesn't really need Cisco and Caitlin and Dr. Wells. And this is another thing. Like, I wouldn't have Thawne masquerade as Harrison Wells. I would have him come up with the pseudonym of Harrison Wells and taunt Barry and be like, I chose the name of the most famous time traveler in fiction and you couldn't figure this out. You're an idiot. Because I feel and also because I want to draw Tom Cavanaugh's likeness because he's such a great actor. So that's just a personal sort of take for me. Is I would have him not take the face of a Harrison Wells, but that's just his face because Barry doesn't know what his face is.
I love this idea of him loving the fact that he's known as the Flash's #1 enemy in his museum as well. I take pride in that statue in that museum. Thank you.
Yeah, that's his whole thing. Is Thawne is scared of not being remembered by history. So why wouldn't he go back in time and create the Flash so he can get the satisfaction? That's totally something he would do. So as far as the dynamic the Team Flash would have, I think Barry would start dating Iris around the time he got his powers. But I think there is something to Barry and Caitlin having a relationship. If nothing else, because they've kind of teased it in the TV show, and the actors definitely have some chemistry when they're in character. Obviously, they wouldn't get together, but they would, recognize that there is some chemistry there. But the whole thing is that they are the prototype to the Flash family, and that they're there for Barry to lean on when he needs an upgrade to his suit and he can't figure out how to build this thing into his suit. Or he needs Caitlin's help to figure out how he's going to input all these calories into his diet because as a speedster, he needs to consume all of this stuff. So what I would do is that after they defeat Eobard Thawne, the Reverse Flash, they would sort of disband because at that point, Caitlin and Cisco would both have discovered their powers. They're both, Vibe and Killer Frost, respectively. And it's not that Caitlin's a villain, but she just has these powers and uses them because the explanation has never made sense in the TV show. But in order to give some diversity, so much needed diversity to the DC universe as it takes place within this Flash universe that I'm building, let's say Thawne dies and leaves Star Labs to Barry Allen in his will. Barry doesn't have time for that, so he basically gives Star Labs to Caitlin because she's one of the smartest person he knows, and using her, she basically rebrands Star Labs as like the greatest like corporation of like medicine, exploration and doing all this stuff with biology and chemistry, and it becomes this global sort of franchise. And then so she sort of basically takes over Star Labs because the way that she wants to use her powers is she wants to help people through healthcare. So she's a superhero, but her means through that is through healthcare. And Cisco's powers, because he has sort of like a different way to travel the universe, is he basically becomes like the guy charting the multiverse, the guy exploring the universe. So he basically goes around to other Earths, documenting the history and things that have happened on other Earths, so he can sort of map out the multiverse, and sort of come back eventually and show people this, we are just one Earth. This is what's happened in other Earths. So he's using his superpowers as a way to give information to people. So out of the trinity of Flash, Vibe, and Killer Frost, you only have one of them who's a traditional superhero, and that's Barry. And that's because of his commitment to justice and helping people in the context of fighting for their lives, in the like very physical, in the moment sort of sense, whereas Caitlin does it in the sense of, through medicine and healthcare and things like that, whereas Vibe does it through information, which I think is a good way to sort of give some much needed diversity to the different perspectives in the group. So the only other caveat that I would have in there is that Caitlin is public with her identity, so she is completely transparent about her having superpowers and her occasionally going out and doing superhero stuff with the Flash while
Hey, I'm
she's
gonna go, so bye.
Okay, see you, Deppelzilla.
No. Talking to the guys on Skype.
All right, see you, man. So that would be the other thing, is that she would be public with her identity, which is just another sort of neat thing that I would include in there.
I'm trying to hang up the damn thing.
So to the larger Star Labs point, so you'd have it be just in Central City initially?
Yeah, like the main thing is in Central City, but then once Caitlin takes over it, and sort of revitalizes it and builds the company up, they're able to make different branches across the U.S. and then eventually North America, and then around the world. So it's sort of
would you have Dr. Hoshi already a part of it at the start, or hired later?
Dr. Hoshi?
Dr. Light, female Dr. Light's father.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, to be honest, I haven't given her that much thought. Fuck, I just had something that it was... Oh, it was about Dr. Alchemy. Because I showed you guys like a little solicitation blurb that I had created for the first issue of this arc that would have taken place maybe like 15 to 20 issues into my Flash run. Now I haven't gotten as far to like actually build scripts yet, unfortunately, but I do have sort of like a general idea of like what I want Barry to do, who his villains are going to be, and one of the big ones is Dr. Alchemy, because Barry, a big part of his life is that he has a life outside of the Flash, which is being a forensic scientist for CCPD, because no matter how fast Barry is, he can't stop something that's already happened, and that's something that's really frustrated him, and it's a big reason why his life as a CSI is so important, because he wants justice for those people who he wasn't there to help. So something that was in the comics in the Silver Age is that Barry worked in the crime lab with Albert Desmond, and over time he developed a split personality, became Mr. Element, and then found the Philosopher's Stone and became Dr. Alchemy. So in order to streamline that a little bit, before this run with Wally getting his powers picks up, after Barry has defeated the Reverse Flash, somewhere between that like year 3 to year 5 time span, Dr. or Mr. Desmond was like the director of the crime lab at CCPD, and then he has like gone off and become Dr. Alchemy, and they fought a bunch of times. And so the introduction to Dr. Alchemy in this run is with the help of Caitlin Snow, Barry has figured out a way to quote unquote lend his speed by creating this medicine that will help people heal from traumatic injuries like brain injuries, losing limbs and stuff like that. So like with Killer Frost's help, they've created a medicine that will basically help people regenerate cells that usually wouldn't regenerate. And so Dr. Alchemy would come in and he would be the villain of that arc because it's sort of like because they're sort of playing the alchemist of changing things, of manipulating things, of giving people things back that they've lost. So that would sort of be where Dr. Alchemy comes in, and that's sort of the impetus for Wally finding out about Barry's very early years as the Flash, because the Flash Museum is being built as the run picks up. It's not a thing where it won't be built until the far future where Thawne exists. It will be built during Barry's time as the Flash and Wally's time as Kid Flash, so they can document things as they happen.
I have a question actually about since Barry's been doing this for a couple of years, like what of his rogues gallery are like active? Like these are like the established villains who've been doing it for doing the villain thing for like years now. It's like we have like Captain Cold's thing been around for a while,
Yes.
Grodd's
So
been around,
like
stuff like that.
So obviously Thawne is perhaps greatest Barry's or actually the Flash's greatest enemy, but the Rogues are Barry Allen's greatest enemy. I talked about on a podcast with Ian, I think last year, when we were talking about Book 2 of Jeff Johns' Flash, how Captain Cold is basically a reverse of Barry Allen. So Captain Cold and his Rogues will be the main antagonists of Barry Allen's run on the Flash. And they would still be the main antagonists, at least until Zoom comes around on Wally West's run as the Flash. So the Rogues that we have up and going when this picks up, because at this point the Rogues are fully formed. So we have Captain Cold, Leonard Snart, the leader, Mick Rory as Heatwave, Sam Scudder as Mirror Master, James Jesse as Trickster, Cold Sister Lisa Snart as Golden Glider, Captain Boomerang, the first Captain Boomerang, and then the Top as well. And so over time, obviously, like how things have gone in the comics, like Sam Scudder has died and Evan McCullough has replaced him. That will happen. The Top will, go off and become crazy where they won't have him. One of the first things that's going to happen after Wally gets his powers is that he and Barry are going to face off against the Rogues as they're trying to pull a heist. And so at the end of that, what's going to happen is like I've kind of come up with this scene where like Scudder. So the difference between Scudder and McCullough is that Scudder has to like build the mirrors that he can travel through, but I would make McCullough almost like a semi-metahuman where he uses tech to, amplify his meta powers. But McCullough can travel through any mirror regardless. But Scudder has to build these mirrors. So after the Rogues have successfully sort of done this heist, Captain Cold is over, sort of shooting Barry with his gun to make sure that the Flash can't stop them from getting away with the loot. Scudder and Lisa Snart are through the window already. Weather Wizard is on backup with Cold, and then Heatwave and the Top are, getting the rest of the loot and are about to go through this mirror. So what happens is that the first thing Wally is going to do is, as Kid Flash, conventionally is run up and go behind Captain Cold, throw him away. And so he's basically going to defeat the Rogues in this sort of one go because they're taken by surprise. And this is going to fracture the Rogues because the whole idea of the Rogues is kind of like the Flash family. Is that they are a family as well. They found, comfort and family with each other to do these devious things. And so Scudder's mirror was, like where they were reporting to was all the way at the end of the other end of the world. And so after the Flash and Kid Flash have defeated Captain Cold, Heatwave, and the Weather Wizard, the Top, Mirror Master, and Lisa Snart are all the way on the other end of the world, and so the Rogues are sort of fractured. So as other stuff is going on with Wally West, as they're dealing with sort of the lower tier, sort of C-list Rogues, The Rogues are trying to, get back together, but they're all pissed off at each other because they're all supposed to have each other's backs, and they didn't, because they didn't expect there to be another Flash, a Kid Flash, in fact, coming around. And so what that would prompt them to do is work on their strategies and their cohesion so the Flash can't break their plans, but also they would enlist the Pied Piper. So when this run picks up Barry's, I think I said like 27, and Iris is 28, and Wally is like 13. Pied Piper would be like 19 or 20, so he would be closer to Wally in age, because Wally and Piper have this really friendly relationship after Piper reforms in the future, and I want to keep that consistent. So that would be one of the first big things that Wally does, but that's not to discredit the Rogues, because the Rogues are arguably the most powerful enemy the Flash has.
I love this
So
idea of
when
like the Rogues need to come back together. Like, hey, we're all a villainous family. We all hate the Flash. Come on, come here.
Well, right, and so part of the thing is that they're all mad at each other because they didn't watch each other's backs. So they have to reform themselves as a family. But when they do, they come back, and like Barry and Wally get the crap kicked out of them. In between this, Thawne would show up and fight Wally West. And part of the thing of Wally West is that, he can't get down the phasing, right? Because when he phases through something, it blows up because he can't hit the right frequency. So obviously, if Barry is just barely a match for Thawne, Wally can't even match up to him. So Thawne is gonna kick the shit out of him. But the way that Wally is going to defeat Thawne for the first time is that when Thawne is going in to like swing at his face, he's going to vibrate his face like he would phasing, and Thawne is going to phase right through, and his hand is going to end up blowing up, which may seem like a little dark, but if you're in that situation and you know that you have this like basically like concussive explosive blast that you can sort of dish out, that's the thing that you're going to have to do to defeat Thawne. So those are sort of like the general sort of principles and sort of broad things that I have specifically for, well, that doesn't make sense. Broad specifically. That's a paradox if I've ever seen one. Those are just sort of the broad sort of ideas that I have for building this Flash run, where we're focusing on the Rogues, Barry's training Wally West, Iris is a main character, and then eventually we would cap that run off with Barry dying in Crisis, and then Wally would pick up as the Flash.
Yeah, sounds good. I mean, just as long as you promise when the Rogue get back together, I want to see a group hug. There needs to be a group hug. Like, yep, we all hate the Flash. We all hate the Flash.
Yeah, no worries. There
Pat.
will definitely be a group reforming of the Rogues at
I
some
hope
point.
also at some point when they make a Flash movie, Vin Diesel can play Captain Cold, so it could be like, we're family. Absolutely familiar with hug.
Oh.
That would be cool.
Also,
but yeah,
if you put in a reference to the Flash Gordon theme song, that would be awesome.
I just might.
It's like that's
Well,
how
no,
it,
that's the thing I like about the Rogues is that like they're the working class villains, and that's what's so
Right.
fun about them. And
They're
they
right.
like they learn the right lessons, but for the wrong reasons, and it's adorable, kind of. And that's why I like them a lot, and I think that's why most people do like them. Anyone who actually knows comics likes the Rogues, and it's funny whenever you see like a newbie or someone who doesn't read comics be like, "Come on, what kind of villains does the Flash have? Like Captain Cold? What's that? Just a Mr. Freeze knockoff?" It's like, bro, come on.
Yeah, like they don't understand how, first of all, how important these characters are to Barry Allen, but also how their powers work. I think Weather Wizard has become like one of my favorite Rogues recently, because I love the way that Jeff Johns writes him as like an intellectual who prefers reading and has a favorite author and is always quoting Mark Twain. Like, I love those little niches that Jeff Johns was able to find for the Rogues. And another aspect of my run is that I would probably continue the tradition of doing rogue profiles like Jeff Johns did, but it would have to, like, I'm not, like, I don't know if I would touch Captain Cold in the same way that Johns did, but I would do it definitely for Rogues that weren't really that big of a part of Johns' run, like Sam Scudder or like the James Jesse Trickster or the Top, because those guys didn't really get to shine in the light of the classic rogues during Johns' run.
That's cool. I mean, I like the way you talk about the Weather Wizard. Like, I feel like, because if these guys are like the working class of villains, they're like, he's reading this book while the other's like at the bar drinking a beer, you know.
Oh yeah, Weather Wizard is great.
Tell me about it. That sounds hilarious. I just like it. Like, we're all hanging out in this bar, just relaxing after getting our butts kicked. Or thinking of a new...
Speaking of other tongue twisters, I'm in statistics right now, and we have been trying to find the test statistic of equations, and that takes so much practice to say test statistic.
Test
without-
statistic. Jake, we've been going at it for almost 2 hours. Do you have any else to say, or do you want to...
No, that's about it. A couple people have dipped out, so maybe since I got to do my TED talk on like the sort of broad general things, if I get some more scripts down or something, we can do this again so you guys can like read them and give me feedback or whatever. So
Sure.
that's pretty much it for right now.
And for our people who ducked out in the audience out there, I hope we can do this again with another character or universe. Always out for ideas and just for the creative process. And this was fun. Thanks, Jake, for kind of suggesting this to us and, getting this new idea started. And thank you, Connor, Doc, for joining. Unless
No
you
problem.
had like any last minute things you wanted to say, or you pretty good.
You like the Flash. That's cool.
I do. Batman used to be my favorite, and I think Superman is probably the best comic book character, but Flash is definitely my favorite. And the more I read him, the more I reread stuff, the more I like. So I would encourage everybody to go read as much Flash as they can.
Right. And maybe watch at least the first 9 episodes of the series before it all goes downhill. But yeah, so until next time, I guess there's one thing to say, but Flash. Bye.